Okay, guys. So when this is going to be about how to go about dealing with the different ways you can add detail and clean up your mesh while you're concept sketching in ZBrush. And what that really means is when you're trying things out and getting stuff going, you want to be able to quickly clean things up so that your geometry doesn't mess up and get in the way of what you're trying to figure out. Okay, so these techniques I'm going to show and these tools that I show are really used when you are in the early stages of working out things. They're not something you're going to do when you get into the final, really detailed aspect of your modeling, but when you're doing roughing things out, getting landmarks placed, things like that, this is the way to go. Okay, so this is going to be the process you're going to use when you're just getting started and like on your fish project or working through ideas, getting proportions right. This is the way to go. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is Dynamesh. Okay, so this is something I've just started noodling with, and you can see it's pretty low resolution. Okay, this has only got 1,300 or 14,000 points. Okay, and remember you can look at that by holding down Shift and F, and that turns on this polyframe so you can actually see what's going down or what's actually happening in here. Okay, so that's what that looks like. I'll turn it off for a second just so you can kind of get a better idea of what's happening here. So when you're doing things like this and you start working, actually I'll turn that back on. Let's say you've got the move brush here, and I'm just trying to start to, I want to get a sense of how things are going here. Let's say I want to push this in a bit more. Maybe I want to pull this up a bit. All that's just dandy. Okay, that's fine. But at a certain point, you're going to want to start adding details that are going to start stretching and messing up the geometry a bit. Okay, so if, for instance, I wanted to add horns on this guy and I started pulling this out like this, you can see what's happening to the geometry here. Okay, it's getting really stretched, and when that happens, you can't really do a lot with some of your other tools because there's just not much there to work with. You can kind of see how that's just, if I do that over here, I'll turn this off for a second. If I do that over here, I can build things up. But once those things get stretched, you kind of run out of resolution to work with. Okay? So the way around that is to use something called Dynamesh. And what Dynamesh does is it re-topologizes your mesh. Okay? Essentially, it takes what you have here, and when you turn it on, by holding down the Control key and dragging outside your model, it's almost like it lays a net over the entire thing and creates equal segments, equal polygons, even where you had big gross chunks of stuff out there. Okay, so where you go for that, I'll close this, is the geometry menu here. So you click on that, and there's a button called Dynamesh, or a tab down here called Dynamesh. You turn that on. I'll move that up so you can see it. And this is actually a button. Okay, that's going to turn orange when you turn it on. And this is the resolution. So the resolution is how dense this mesh will be. Okay, so if I just turn that on, nothing happens right off the bat. But if I go back now to my move brush and I do the same thing with the horns here, let's just make this really kind of awful looking. Let's do that. Yeah, let's pull that out a bit. Up the side. Okay, let's just do this so it gets really, really stretched. Okay, you gotta put a couple other bumps in here as well, like that. Okay, so it's all stretched. Now the way I activate Dynamesh is I hold down Control and I drag outside here, and watch what happens to that stuff. Okay, it immediately cleans that up and puts the same level of detail over the entire piece here. Okay, and you can see how clever that is and how great that works, because I have instantly, without touching anything else, gotten back to where I can now start to manipulate this in further ways. Okay, so I could start to, put and pull even more stuff out of here. And you can do this as often as you need to. So every time you want to just clean things up, you just hold on Control and drag, and it does it. It cleans it up. Okay? Super simple and really, really just, it's like it's something that's essentially made the idea of having to divide things over and over to get detail a bit obsolete, especially in the early stages when you're doing stuff. Okay? So that's really, really useful. As you get further along, then you can increase the resolution here to a higher level and do more stuff and drag it out, and you'll see it gets even more dense. Okay, now this does increase the number of active points you have, but still, as you go through here like this, that becomes not that big a deal. This is a really low res thing right now. Okay, so that's a really, really useful tool to keep in your toolkit, especially when you're working on, as I said, just trying to work out general shapes of things. Okay, so if I wanted to give this guy something more of a neck here, we'll start to pull that down and out a bit more like this. I can start to get that kind of a quick sense of what that might look like happening here. Start making that thing even more stretched, and then just Control drag, boom, you get it. Now that upped that resolution because I didn't undo what I had done there. Okay, so I'll get that back down because I don't really want it even to be that dense at this point. So now if I do it, it's just going to clean that up a bit more. Okay? Can't stand this too fat here. I'm going to thin that out a bit. It's starting to make me look crazy. This guy's got some serious jaws. Okay, at the top. There we go. Okay, so the other thing that comes in really handy with this, and by the way, if you get a message that you can't use Dynamesh because you have subdivisions, what that means is you have to delete the lower or higher resolution versions of this you have. I'm not going to go into detail on it because you probably won't have done any of that yet, so I'm not going to sweat it. But if that happens, shoot me a little note in the message thing and I'll give you an idea of how to fix that. Okay? So, all right. So we got that guy going. Now, what if you want further detail, but just in a limited area? So your initial thought is, I have to make this resolution higher. Well, you don't actually have to do that anymore because there's something called Sculptris brushes in ZBrush now that allow you to use almost any brush that adds or manipulates the geometry without actually having to bump up the resolution of this. Okay, so this is the icon for it right here. It doesn't work in the move brush, but it will work in, for instance, the standard brush. There we go. That here. I'm going to switch off to a pen now so I can show you a little bit better how this might be used. Okay, I'm going to turn this off for a second just so you can kind of see. If I have this off, okay. So normally if I were trying to build up this area here, like around the eye socket, for instance, or up above the nose here, or if I wanted to push this in a bit by holding down Option, you'll see it only does what I can do with the resolution I have here. Okay, it hasn't really changed any of those polygon shapes to something larger or smaller. Okay, but if you turn on the Sculptris Pro, the Sculptris brushes, and do that, you'll notice that my icon here, instead of being red like it normally is, turns to purple. Okay, if I turn this guy on right there, okay, and what this means is that you can go in here, I'll scale this down, and you can actually draw like this, and it's increasing the resolution locally here. Okay, so it's making it more high res where I brush. And how high res it gets is dependent on the size of the brush. So if I make this larger, it's going to be coarser. Okay, you can kind of see that there. But if I make it smaller, it's going to get even finer detail in here. Okay, like so. Now if I want to push this in, I'll hold on Option. Let's say I just want to kind of jam that in a bit more like that. Okay, like so. All right, so you can start to see here what that's doing. And that's a super useful thing too, simply because then you don't have to make the entire mesh denser. You can just make that tiny area more dense. Okay, and I want to show this with Dynamesh in particular, because if I hit Dynamesh now, it's going to lose a bunch of that resolution. So if I hit Control and drag, boom, it's gone. Okay, however, I just undid that. However, if I turn on Project here in Dynamesh, what it's going to do is try to preserve the basic detail I have here while also reconfiguring the mesh. So Control drag like that. And you'll see what it did there. It simplified it, but it did keep the higher res as it goes around. All right? Like so. So it's kind of getting the best of both worlds. And this is going to sound really convoluted and complicated at this point, but it's a super useful tool to be able to just pull some of this detail in without having to remesh the entire thing as you go. I'll turn this back on. It's kind of hard to see it in or use it in this polyframe mode just because it's so hard to see what's going on. But again, if I wanted to take these horns and turn them into more ear-like shapes or something else and start to drag out a little more detail here, I can do that. Okay, like in the ear area here. If I want to push this in a bit and start to actually get some cavities going in that ear, and some other more bony lumps behind the ear and so on, like these cheekbones here, or flesh out this jawbone a bit more. Again, that's just super easy to do with the combination of Dynamesh and Sculptris. Okay, and I will talk about how you get this nice and even later when you're ready to add more detail and not keep Dynameshing things. So the Dynamesh idea is when you're really trying to just work out the shapes of things and getting they say the bony landmarks, okay, the things that define us in terms of what we expect on on an ogre or on a person. Things like the cheekbones, the jawbones, those various points that we expect to see, and that when you are trying to build something, give people a frame of reference and start to see what actually starts to make sense with with what's going on Adam's apple here, things like that. Sorry, I always get caught up in things when I start actually doing something. Okay. All right, so that's just kind of a kind of a primer on using these guys. Okay, the Sculptris, again, it doesn't work with Move, but it works with any of these other brushes. Excuse me. Like the Damn Standard, it works great. So if I wanted to add, a little more detail under the eyes here, start to bring those eyelids out a bit more like that. Pull it out the other way. Excuse me. That looks bad. Okay. Anyway, that's the idea. Try it out, and I'll do this when we do the walkthrough too, so you won't be seeing it for the first time, hopefully. Okay. When I do that. All right. That's it. Good job. No, not me. You. Hang in there.